I'm Helen. I'm 92 years old now, and I want you to listen to me very closely, not because I'm trying to scare you, but because I've lived long enough to see something very important that most people miss until it is almost too late. I used to think aging was simple, just getting a little slower, a little more tired, a little more forgetful, and that's all. But I was wrong, so very wrong. There are warning signs, quiet ones, subtle ones, the kind you almost convince yourself are normal. And I ignored them too, one by one, like little whispers I kept pushing away. I remember waking up some mornings, feeling a strange heaviness in my body, and saying to myself, "Well, I'm just getting old, that's all." And I would smile and carry on. But deep inside, something was changing, slowly, quietly, and I didn't respect those changes the way I should have. I see now that the body always speaks before it breaks down, always. But we don't listen because we are busy, or stubborn, or simply used to pushing through everything in life. And I understand that, I really do. But there comes a moment, a very quiet moment, when you realize that ignoring those small signs was actually the most dangerous thing you could have done. And I don't want you to learn that the hard way like I did. I want you to recognize those signals early, while there is still time to respond gently, calmly, wisely. Because aging is not just about wrinkles or gray hair. No, it is about noticing what is changing inside you, what is becoming different in your strength, your mind, your breath, your balance, even your mood. And I promise you, these changes do not arrive loudly. They arrive softly, almost kindly, as if they don't want to disturb you. But they are still important, very important. And today, I'm going to share with you the 8 warning signs I wish someone had explained to me when I was younger. Signs I once ignored. Signs that taught me painful lessons I carry even now at 92. So please, stay with me. Don't dismiss this as just another conversation about aging, because what I'm about to tell you might help you notice something in your own life that you've been quietly overlooking for far too long. I need to tell you something a little difficult now, something I didn't understand for many years, and maybe you won't want to hear it at first either. But please stay with me, slowly, calmly, because this is where everything begins to matter more than we think. The real danger of aging is not the aging itself. It is what we choose to ignore while we are aging. I learned that the hard way. I truly did. There was a time in my life when I would notice small changes in my body and simply smile them away. I would feel a little more tired than usual and say, "Well, Helen, that's just age." I would forget a name or walk into a room and pause for a moment, and I would laugh it off. I even felt proud sometimes, like I was being strong by not worrying. But now I understand something very different. Those small moments were not random. They were signals, quiet signals, the kind your body sends when it is asking for attention, not punishment. And the truth is, most people don't notice these signals because life keeps moving. We are busy taking care of others, working, surviving, trying to stay independent for as long as we can. And so we push ourselves. We say, "It's nothing," again and again, until one day it becomes something. I remember seeing people my age suddenly face health crises that seemed to come out of nowhere. But now I know it was never out of nowhere. There were always signs before. always. They were just overlooked, minimized, or explained away. And I want you to understand this very gently. Your body is not betraying you when it changes. It is communicating with you, sometimes very softly, sometimes repeatedly, but always honestly. And if you ignore it for too long, it stops whispering and starts forcing you to listen. That is why this conversation matters so much, because what I'm going to share with you are not dramatic warnings or rare conditions. They are everyday signs, the kind you might already be feeling without realizing their meaning. And I don't want fear for you. No, I want awareness. I want you to feel the difference between normal aging and warning signs that deserve your attention. Because that difference, that small understanding, can change everything in how gently you age and how long you stay well. I want to take you a little deeper now, slowly, carefully, because this is the point where most people start to recognize themselves in what I'm saying, and sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. I understand that. I truly do. You see, when I was younger, even in my 70s, I believed that serious health problems always arrived suddenly, like a storm, something dramatic that you could not possibly miss. But life has taught me otherwise, very gently, very firmly. The truth is that many serious problems begin as small, quiet changes in the body, so quiet that you almost need silence to notice them. I remember a time when I started feeling slightly unsteady on my feet. Not falling, nothing dramatic, just a tiny hesitation when I stood up, a slight pause before walking forward, and I would tell myself, "Helen, you're just moving a little slower today," and I would carry on. But looking back now, I see that my body was speaking to me, softly, repeatedly, asking me to pay attention. And it wasn't just balance. There were other moments too, moments I didn't take seriously enough, like feeling unusually tired after very simple tasks, or needing more time to recover from things that used to be easy. I would sit down and say, "It will pass," and sometimes it did, but the message kept returning. This is what I want you to understand very clearly. The body rarely speaks once. It repeats itself. It tries again and again, in small ways, in quiet ways, until we finally stop and listen. And I know why we ignore it, because we don't want to feel fragile. We don't want to believe something might be changing inside us in a serious way. So we choose the easier explanation. It's just age, we say, and we move on. But there is a difference, a very important difference, between normal aging and warning signs, and that difference is not always obvious at first. It reveals itself slowly, over time, in patterns, in repetition, in things that keep happening again and again. I wish I had understood that earlier. I wish someone had told me that ignoring the small signs does not make them disappear. It only delays understanding. So as I continue sharing with you, I want you to listen not just with your ears, but with your memory, with your own experiences. Because somewhere in your life, there may already be small signs you have been explaining away, just like I once did. Now I want to begin sharing the first group of warning signs with you, not as a lecture, but as a memory, as something I lived through myself, and almost misunderstood for too long. The first sign, and perhaps the most common one, is sudden, unexplained weight loss. I don't mean the kind that comes from dieting or trying to be healthy. I mean when your body begins to change without any reason you can clearly see. I remember looking in the mirror one day and noticing my clothes sitting differently, a little looser, a little unfamiliar, and my first thought was, oh, maybe I just haven't been eating as much lately. So I didn't worry, not at first. But now I understand that when the body changes without intention, it is not something to dismiss too quickly, because it can be a quiet signal that something deeper is happening inside, something that needs attention, not fear, but attention. Then there is memory that starts to slip in ways that affect daily life. Not just forgetting where you placed your glasses, that happens to everyone. But when you begin to lose track of conversations, or repeat questions without realizing, or stand in a room wondering why you walked in there. I experienced moments like that too, and I would laugh gently and say, "Helen, you're just tired." But deep down, I felt something was shifting. Another sign is balance, or rather, the loss of steady balance. Those small moments when you feel slightly unsteady while walking, or you hesitate before stepping forward. I used to hold on to furniture more often than I admitted, just for a second, just for safety. But I didn't think it meant anything important. And then there is fatigue, not the normal tiredness after a long day, but a deeper kind of tiredness that follows simple activities, when even small tasks feel heavier than they should. I remember sitting down more often, not because I planned to, but because my body insisted. I share these not to worry you, but to open your awareness gently, because each of these signs on their own may seem small, even harmless, but together they tell a story, and that story deserves to be heard early, not late. I want to pause with you here for a moment. Just breathe with me, because what I'm about to say next is something I wish I had understood much earlier in my own life. There is a second group of warning signs, the kind that people often ignore the longest, because they don't feel dramatic. They feel normal enough. But that is exactly why they can be so dangerous. One of them is shortness of breath during simple things, not when you are running or climbing mountains. No, I mean things like walking across a room or climbing a few steps. I remember feeling that slight change in my breathing, just a little heavier than before, and I would tell myself, "Helen, you're just moving slower now," and I accepted it too easily. But the body does not usually change without reason. It adjusts slowly, and when breathing becomes harder during simple activity, it is often a quiet signal that something inside needs attention, something related to the heart, or the lungs, or both. Another sign, sudden changes in vision, not complete loss of sight, but moments where things become slightly blurry, or not as sharp as they were before. I remember rubbing my eyes and thinking I was just tired, or that I needed stronger glasses, and sometimes that is true, but sometimes it is not so simple. Sometimes it is the body asking for a closer look, a proper check. And then there is something even more subtle. emotional withdrawal, when you slowly start stepping back from people, not because anyone hurt you, but because you just don't feel like engaging the way you used to. I went through this quietly. I would sit in silence more often, and I told myself I was just enjoying peace. But later I realized it was something deeper, a kind of sadness that I had not fully acknowledged at the time. There is also chest discomfort, or a strange heaviness that is not sharp pain, but still not right. I remember moments of fatigue where I couldn't explain why I felt so drained, and I dismissed it as aging. But now I know that the heart often speaks in whispers before it ever shouts. And finally, slow healing, or getting sick more often than before. Small cuts taking longer to recover. Minor illnesses lingering just a bit too long. I noticed these changes, but I did not connect them at the time. And this is the truth I want you to hold gently in your mind. None of these signs are meant to create fear. They are meant to create awareness, because awareness, early awareness, is what gives you time. And time is something we should never waste when our body is trying to speak to us. I want to continue gently with you now, because this part is very important, maybe even more important than the others. And I say that with all the calmness I have learned over the years. There are moments in life when the body becomes quieter in its warnings, but not less serious, just more subtle. And if you are not paying attention, you can easily miss what it is trying to tell you. One of those signs is chest discomfort that does not feel sharp, not dramatic, just a strange heaviness, a pressure, or a tight feeling that comes and goes. I remember moments when I would sit down and feel this weight in my chest and think, it will pass, I'm just tired. And sometimes it would ease, so I convinced myself it was nothing. But now I understand how easily we can normalize something that deserves attention. Another sign is persistent sadness or withdrawal. Not the kind of sadness that comes from a bad day, but a slow, quiet fading of interest in things you once enjoyed. I went through that too. I would sit in my chair longer than usual. I would delay calls. I would postpone small joys without even noticing I was doing it. And I told myself I was just resting. But deep inside, I was stepping back from life more than I realized. And then there is the body's ability to recover, or rather, when that ability begins to slow. Small cuts taking longer to heal. Colds lingering a little too long. Infections feeling heavier than they used to. I noticed this gradually, not all at once, and that is exactly why it was so easy to ignore. There is also the feeling of general fatigue that doesn't match your activity, when even simple tasks feel heavier than they should. When you sit down not because you plan to rest, but because your body insists on it. I used to think this was just getting older, but now I see it more clearly. It was information. It was communication. And I want you to hear this very softly from me. None of these signs are meant to frighten you. They are not here to make you anxious or worried. They are here to help you become aware earlier than I did, because awareness gives you options. Awareness gives you time. and time gives you the chance to respond gently instead of suddenly. I ignored too many of these signals when I was younger, not because I was careless, but because I trusted that everything would simply pass. But the body does not always work that way. Sometimes it keeps speaking, quietly, until we finally learn to listen. Now we are coming to the most important part of this conversation, and I want you to stay with me a little closer here, not with fear, but with honesty, because this is where everything begins to make sense. There came a time in my life when all these small signs I had ignored, they started to connect. Not suddenly, but slowly, like pieces of a puzzle I had been dropping for years without realizing it. I remember sitting one evening, just sitting quietly, and I realized something simple but powerful. My body had been trying to talk to me for a very long time, and I had been answering it with silence, or excuses, or delay. The weight loss I ignored, the tiredness I dismissed, the moments of breathlessness I explained away, the sadness I called normal aging, all of it. It wasn't separate. It was a pattern, a message, something I should have listened to earlier. And I felt something in that moment, not panic, not fear, but clarity, a very quiet kind of sadness mixed with understanding. Because I finally saw what I had been doing to myself without meaning to. I want you to understand something very deeply here. Your body does not suddenly fail you one day without reason. It usually walks you toward that moment gently, repeatedly, giving you chances to notice, to respond, to slow down, to care. And I think that is what hurts the most when I look back. Not that I aged, not that I experienced changes, but that I had so many early chances to pay attention, and I didn't fully take them. There was one moment I will never forget. I was holding on to a chair for balance longer than I used to, and I remember thinking, this is probably nothing. But later I realized it was something. It was one of many small signals I had grouped together as nothing important. And I want to say this to you very gently. Please do not wait for a big moment to force you to listen, because by then it is much harder to respond calmly. The real lesson I learned at 92 years old is that wisdom does not come from surviving the big events. It comes from respecting the small warnings early enough that the big events never need to happen. And I wish, truly, I wish I had understood that sooner, because so much suffering can be softened or even avoided if we simply learn to listen when the body whispers, not only when it screams. And now, as we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something very simple, but something I have learned over a very long life, 92 years of living, and watching, and sometimes learning the hard way. Aging is not your enemy. No, it never was. It is a process your body moves through with you, step by step, day by day, and most of the time, it is far kinder and more patient than we are with it. Because the truth is, the body does not suddenly become weak. It changes slowly. It adjusts. It adapts. And it communicates with you the entire time, not to scare you, but to guide you. I think back now to all the times I dismissed those early signs, the tiredness, the breathlessness, the small changes in memory, the moments of imbalance, and I realized something very humbling. I was not being strong by ignoring them. I was simply not listening. And there is a difference, a very important difference. Strength is not pretending everything is fine when it is not. Strength is noticing early, gently, and responding with care, with attention, with respect for your own body. If I could go back and speak to my younger self, I would not shout, I would not panic. I would simply sit beside her and say, "Helen, please, slow down. Listen a little more closely. Your body is trying to help you, not hurt you." And maybe that is what I am trying to do with you now, in my own way, softly, across time. Because if even one person watching this begins to notice their own warning signs earlier, if even one person chooses awareness instead of dismissal, then everything I shared today has meaning. So I want to leave you with this final thought, very gently, very honestly. Do not wait for your body to become loud before you take it seriously. Listen when it is still whispering, because that is when you have the most power, the most choice, and the most time. And I hope, truly, that you give yourself that gift while there is still time to do so, gently, wisely, and without fear.